Would you believe me if I told you that my dad was actually the one who introduced me to the world of psychedelics and cultivation? Well, I hope you would, because it's the truth. In light of Father's Day happening recently, I did an interview with my dad to tell about our interesting story. It's truly one of a kind. In this interview, you'll hear a lot of my dad's wisdom around psychedelics and how we kind of uniquely walked that path of parent-to-child stewardship as I grew up and the cultural narrative around psychedelics was slowly starting to shift. If you'd like to learn more about who my dad is, you can check out the link in the description box below. My dad actually has a whole YouTube channel where you guys can dig into his really interesting content. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Happy Father's Day. Send out your psychic tendrils of love to my dad wherever he may be, and enjoy the interview. See you on the next one. Well, as far as I'm concerned, this is one half of the most important team of people in the entire world, my creator, my dad. You are a brilliant writer, a creator of content about spirituality, philosophy, psychology, and all things truth. And also, you're the reason that I'm interested in cultivation in the first place, because as I was growing up, we had a lot of talks and just books around the house about cultivation as kind of the tide in the cultural narrative around psychedelics was slowly changing as I was growing up. So I just wanted to hear a little bit about your thoughts on psychedelics and the cultivation process. But first, I want to know who you are and what you do. And yeah, can start off there.
Okay, I'm Chuck Swindoll. I'm Jessica's dad. I love and adore this woman that you're looking at in the picture here. So just so everyone knows, yes, we were very open growing up. I think one of the most important things, I mean, this is huge. If you're a parent and you have kids, don't hide this. If you hide this stuff, kids will find out. Kids will find out, and it's hypocritical, or it's hypocritical to promote and say mushrooms are great, but then you're hiding these things and not talking about these things with your kids. And so one of the things that Jenny and I really wanted to do, raising Jess and Noah, was to be very open about our cannabis use and about our mushroom use. And I learned that because we did hide our cannabis use for quite a while. And of course, the kids found out, and there was a big blow up, and it was a big negative thing. And so that was a big lesson for me as a parent, that you need to be open about this stuff with your kids. I'm not saying that, you just take your mushrooms and just start handing them over to your kids. I'm not saying that. I'm saying have open dialogue about these things. And I guess to get right into it, one of the really great things about magic mushrooms, about psilocybin, is its effect on the body physiologically. Now, I use a little word picture when I describe this to folks to help folks understand why someone would take a psychedelic, why on earth they would want to go out of their mind, why on earth they would want to engage something like this. Okay, when we grow up, we all are educated basically the way our parents think. And so our parents naturally, and this isn't a bad thing, indoctrinate us into their world. And this is normal, natural, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. But after you leave the house and you're becoming adult and all this stuff, you have to just think for yourself and decide for yourself in this world, and not continue to think like your parents taught you to think, but to think for yourself and on your own. And that is actually a lot more difficult than people realize, because in a lot of ways, when we're indoctrinated, we don't realize we're even being indoctrinated. And so one of the great things about psychedelics, and especially mushrooms, is that they break down thought patterns. And this is great for psychology, because all of us, as we grow up, we tend to develop tapes repeating phrases in our minds. And often, at least it was for me, was negative statements about myself and negative tapes. And these tapes we run in our head over and over again, as well as how we were taught growing up to deal with that. And if that doesn't work for you, you get in a bind psychologically, because you can't break out of your thought patterns. You can't think out of the way you've always thought about things. And so I like to use the picture of a forest. And if you live next to a forest, let's say that you walk to school, and when you walk to school, you had to walk through the forest. Well, every day that you're walking the forest, you create a path. And as you do this over the years, growing up, year after year, you're always walking in that same path. And what tends to happen in the forest is it begins to form a little trail that you're always walking. And that's great because it's the quickest way to school. But take that same word picture or that same idea and use it in the sense of thinking. So you're at one place and you want to think differently, but you always go the same path to try and think differently. You're never trying a new path. You're never thinking outside of, quote unquote, the box you've always thought in. And one of the great things that mushrooms do is they come into the mind, and this is actual real physiology. They mimic serotonin. They mimic the effect of serotonin in the brain. When you ingest psilocybin, it dephosphorylates into psilocin, and psilocin passes the blood-brain barrier. And what this does is it floods the brain with all of this potential. That's what I like to call it. All kinds of potential, all types of electricity. You run on DC voltage. Every thought that you have is literally a pathway of DC voltage that's running through your brain to create your thoughts. And this is the pathway I was talking about in the forest. You have an electrical pathway that happens in your thinking, in your brain. And the great thing about mushrooms is they come in and they clear out all the pathways. They clear out all the ways you've always thought about yourself, your identity, all these things that really ground you in the way that you are. They do a great job clearing all of that out. So then you can actually start to think differently because you don't identify the same way. You're not seeing your surroundings in the same way. You're actually not ingesting the input from nature in the same way. And this is incredibly revitalizing for someone psychologically because they're not stuck in that indoctrinated thought pattern that they've always thought through. And it's not something you choose to do. That's one of the great things about mushrooms also, is that it's not a choice. They do these things naturally. And you automatically start thinking for yourself because these thought patterns that you've always had, these electrical conduits that you have running through your brain through indoctrination, aren't there anymore. And now you actually genuinely can think differently about the world, differently about yourself. And this is extremely healing. This is extremely healing because it's a non-threatening way to think differently. So like if you go to a counselor, which is a great idea, but if you go to a counselor and they're giving you advice and so forth, that's one way of seeing things differently. But it's an entirely different process when you yourself walk into a space and literally have your hard drive erased. That's the way Terence McKenna used to put it in his lectures. He says mushrooms do a great job of erasing your hard drive so that you can reprogram it. Because folks, we're all programmed. We're all programmed in the way that we grow up, and that is unavoidable. And so when you have your hard drive cleared, you now have a free space. You actually are free thinking. You actually are thinking for yourself and deciding for yourself, how do I want to see myself now? How do I want to see nature in my environment? How do I want to approach these other people in this relationship that I have with them? And all of this stuff restructures. And I cannot even begin to tell you how healing this is. It will help get you out of maybe a religion you were indoctrinated into, or a belief system you were indoctrinated into, or a science or medicine that you were indoctrinated into. It's going to be great breaking you out of those holds that society has put on you. And so that's one of the big reasons why I got involved in mushrooms. That's why I started cultivating mushrooms, because I really knew that as tightly as I was raised conservative Christian. I knew that there was going to be no way I was going to be able to break out of that thinking just because I decide one day, hey, I'm not going to think like a Christian anymore. It doesn't work like that. You actually have to go through a process of having your hard drive erased. So anyway, that's why we got into it as a family. That's why we began to have dialogue with our kids about it, and we began to walk into this space because we wanted the healing that Jenny's my wife, we wanted the healing that Jenny and I experienced to be also that for our kids. We wanted them to have an experience of healing and literally, and this is the honest truth, to get out of the indoctrination that I programmed into them, because my kids, obviously, they think like me because I raised them. And I didn't want my kids to live the rest of their life in my head. I wanted them to have their own head, their own opinion, their own thoughts about the world. And so this is really good for a parent because it helps break the umbilical cord. It helps cut that, it helps sever that, it helps sever that adolescent relationship that you've always had with your kids so that you can think of and see them as more of a peer-to-peer rather than as an adolescent. And this is extremely healthy. This is extremely healthy to have a peer-to-peer relationship with your kids rather than one where I'm the parent and you're the adolescent. When they're an adult, they need to be treated as an adult. And again, this is all part of the developmental workings of growing up and becoming an adult. So that's a long answer to your first question. I hope that helped clarify something.
It is, yeah. I mean, I remember those days of just how helpful it was to, clear the forest path that we had been pretty ingrained in. And I haven't heard that forest metaphor, but I have heard the snow hill metaphor. Same thing, when you build a track in the snow hill, and then mushrooms kind of work as like a snow plow to clear everything all out. And I've really found that to be true. I know a lot of folks at One Earth and just generally in the world right now are opening up to these things for the first time. And, there's a lot of like fears and setbacks that come with that. So just curious when it comes to either the cultivation process and or the consumption process, what words of wisdom would you give to that, like, first time beginner, like new to the whole process being? Yeah.
I would definitely say my first response would be that nature loves courage. That's a huge quote from McKenna. And this applies to all of life. If you're ever really going to change, if you're ever really going to go through an awakening process, it requires courage. Joseph Campbell used to say, if you're falling, dive. And this, again, is the same kind of thought process whereby if you're really going to go through this, it's going to require courage, because it's not as easy as just deciding one day I'm going to do this. And it takes courage to start a little cultivating farm in your house, and having a little grow tub where you're growing these mushrooms. The only way you can know the truth is through your own experience. No one can hand you truth. No one can hand you the answers. These things are discovered. These things are realized. And so courage is really at the basis of that, because you have to be willing to think differently, to think for yourself. And so when it comes to cultivation, courage would be the first one. And that means you got to go. I remember the first time I went to Amazon to find books about mushroom cultivation, and literally my heart rate raised. I broke out into a cold sweat because I was so afraid. I was afraid of engaging these things that society, that government had told me my whole life, this is going to destroy you. And we will hear that over and over and over again. It's very hard to break that. And so don't worry if, when you start to read a book that's heretical, when you start to engage nature in a way that society says, don't do that, it's okay to be anxious about it. It's okay to break out in a cold sweat and your heart start racing. You'll need to walk into that space. And again, that requires courage. And nature loves courage. Nature will reveal her bounty to those who are courageous. And so when you will find out, as you read these books, as you walk into these spaces, you're first of all going to find out, why am I afraid? Why? This doesn't make any sense. These things are actually helpful. These things are healthy. This is in many ways a human's birthright to engage nature in this way. And you will find it very nurturing, actually. You will find it that nature is actually quite loving in many ways, because nature will naturally bring you into these spaces of heresy and teach you to not be afraid. And that's just something you have to discover for yourself, and being willing to learn. Another great thought psychologically is that if a person has a full bowl, meaning they know everything, they can't learn anything. So you have to be willing to drain your bowl of knowledge, drain what you think you know, drain what you think is truth, so that your bowl still has room to fill with more information, because that's going to show you a deeper and deeper and deeper truth. That never ends. Truth is fractal. It goes deeper and deeper and deeper. So don't ever think you have found the conclusion, you have found the answer. That's not the way it works, because nature is limitless, and you are a nature creature, so you also are limitless. And so therefore, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of learning. Don't be afraid of experiencing. Do as McKenna used to say, do your homework, study these medicines, study the proper doses, talk to people who have used these before, engage in conversations, because this not only will break your fear, but it will educate you. And you really can't learn too much. So pursue that. Willingly, courageously pursue education, pursue others, have these conversations so that you won't be afraid anymore, because you're going to find out that it's actually a beautiful experience and there's no reason to be afraid of these things.
Mm. Oh my gosh, yeah, I completely agree. That's really good advice. Having those 2 points of having courage and also really doing your thorough research.
Yes.
Yeah, it's really important. And I sometimes will say, when people ask me for cultivation tips, you can never use too much rubbing alcohol is like my number one tip. And
sure.
you can never use or do too much research when it comes to consumption. That's really true. And you kind of touched on this, but there are just a lot of misconceptions out there and fear around consuming psychedelics. And I'm curious, what were some of those misconceptions in particular that you were navigating when you first started kind of opening this treasure chest? What had you originally, thought?
There's no need to be afraid of becoming addicted. That's one of the real things that was instilled into me growing up, especially in church, was that all of these things are gateway drugs, that cannabis is a gateway drug, that magic mushrooms are a gateway drug. They're not. They're actually anti-addiction. The way cannabis balances the autonomic nervous system shows you that it's anti-addiction. And the way that magic mushrooms enter the brain and cause the serotonin-like effect will tell you, when you have that experience, this is not something I want to do all the time. This is really heavy. This is really contemplative. You know what I'm saying? It's sort of like, do you ever get addicted to a counselor? No, that's not really the way that it works. A good counselor is going to be someone that's going to be challenging you, so that when you go in and talk to that counselor, it's like, okay, this is heavy. I'm entering into mind space here. And this is something that requires a tremendous amount of self-responsibility to engage. And so these are the kind of things that it's motivated through courage, not through fear. And so that's why it's important to have vast experiences and talk to other people and educate yourself, and this will break down your fear.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I remember those that rhetoric around like your brain being like an egg in a frying pan or whatever.
Yeah. That's true for some drugs, but it's not true for all drugs. That's another thing that people do, is they take cannabis and mushrooms and so forth, and they put them all in the same category. They say this is the same as meth, the same as heroin, the same as PCP. No, dude. No, man, you don't understand.
And on that note of like, putting all these different kinds of drugs in the same basket, or different type of substances in the same basket, not every person is a great candidate for taking psychedelics. There are some people who, it may be best and safer to abstain from use. And I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that. Like, who should and shouldn't be, generally speaking, consuming psychedelics?
I would definitely say anyone who has high mental disturbance, schizophrenia, a person who is maybe having to take a whole lot of pharmaceutical drugs in order to maintain some kind of balance. You really need to be very careful if you're going to be mixing something like this with some drugs you're already taking, meaning pharmaceutical drugs. I always advise folks that are in that place, honestly, you need to consult a naturopathic doctor. Would probably be a good person to talk to about that. If you engage in this world, you will come across people who are in touch with shamans, are in touch with people who have a really a much better grasp of these medicines, and it would be a good idea to engage those folks. But I would say anyone who has severe mental disorders, the real caution needs to be taken. And absolutely, if you're going to go down this road, I don't buy into the idea it's a good idea to take a heroic dose, just to jump right in and take like 4 or 5 grams dried and you're just going to plummet into it. That actually might have a negative effect. I went with the routine of just trying 1 gram dried first, and that was great, because you really begin to sense like, holy smokes, this really is beginning to take me out of mind. And then you take like a gram and a half or 2 grams dried, and it's going to be an even deeper experience. And then maybe you'll go to fresh mushrooms and maybe take, 30 or 40 grams fresh with 10 times the amount, but it's fresh, it's not dried. And so you're going to get the same effect as, say, a 40-gram wet as you will a 4-gram dry. And so, again, what I'm saying is you're working your way to a deeper and deeper dose. And this is a way of nurturing your psyche into that space. So just try a very low dose up front, then try a higher dose, then a higher dose. And you'll realize when you're reaching a space of, I really shouldn't go past this spot. And you'll need to talk to an experienced person to know if you actually should challenge that or if you should obey that. If you should, when you're developing some fear, let's say, and you're afraid of taking a deeper dose, talk about it with someone else. Read some books about it. Maybe you're having a hard time going from 3 grams to 5 grams. That's okay. Talk to folks who have taken higher doses than 3 grams. Find out what their experience has been so that you can not only better navigate your own, but then you can also kind of have a better idea of what you're walking into. And just, you're shepherding yourself into this stuff. And that's real important to do so that you don't have this horrible experience. And then it's like, well, I never want to try them again. They're terrible for me and all this kind of stuff. That might not actually be true if you didn't walk into this gently. You might actually find they could have been quite beneficial to you.
Yeah, I agree. I always recommend even not less than a gram, like even microdosing for your first experience. Going really slow. I'm sure that when people hear that you are my dad and that you showed me the light and the way into cultivating and psychedelics, that there will be just a lot of curiosity around that. And I would love to hear just what comes to mind and what you can touch on when it comes to like shepherding psychedelics as a parent.
You're probably going to want to wait until they're closer to adulthood than when they're a child. This is, in my opinion, this is something that adults engage. It's, in my opinion, it's not for something a child to be engaging. I would have extreme caution as a parent. And so I would say that on the front end, it's probably something, it's fine to engage just light dialogue, having some just really open communication. That's something that you need to establish, I think, as a parent very early on, is just open, transparent honesty. Like I said earlier in this recording, Jenny and I learned the hard way that we hid our cannabis use, and that was a bad idea because then the kids really feel like they're being lied to by their own parents when they find this stuff out. And that's just really a bad space, and it's hard to get out of that and regain trust. And so it's good to begin to openly dialogue about drug use when they're younger, but not encourage them to use drugs, but just talk about what drugs do to the brain. Why is heroin really addictive and mushrooms or cannabis aren't? Talk about the physiology. That's where you need to educate yourself about the autonomic nervous system, educate yourself about serotonin, the serotonin system, educate yourself about psilocybin, psilocin, dephosphorylation, and all of these things that go along, the science that go along with it. And this will not only better your conversation with your child, but they'll know that you're actually an educated authority about it. I mean, like, you know what you're talking about, and you can answer their questions in ways that make sense and that match the science as it's understood. And so this again builds trust, and your kid as they grow up, and then they become an adult, a teenager, or a teenager and adult and moving on. You've already established a rapport with them based on trust, openness, transparency, education, science. And this is really going to help in the relationship, and they're not engaging this thing uneducated. One of the big ways that kids get into trouble is that they find out, hey, it's okay for me to take this drug, and then they go out and just dive in because they haven't had any conversations with the user. And since all of us here that are using mushrooms and cannabis are drug users, quote unquote, it's a good idea to educate your kids on why you became a drug user and why being a drug user isn't a bad thing if it's done appropriately. If these drugs are used appropriately, your life will blossom. Your mind will open, your relationships will deepen, your love for yourself and others will grow. That's the natural offspring of these things. I'm a big believer in the idea of a humanistic approach, meaning the human being is the beginning state of understanding. So you're always coming from a place of compassion, a place of love, because that is what we're made of. And so any kind of approach when it comes to this kind of stuff needs to source from a place of love, of compassion, of understanding, transparency, and so forth. And so as a parent, that's awesome to do that with your kids. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, well said. Yeah, you really like towed the line elegantly there. And I agree. I think that just the element of open communication and honesty is so important, especially in light of just what the general culture and narrative has been for such a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah. If people want to hear more from you, where can they find you?
I'm on YouTube. I'm on a totally different wavelength than Jess, so you're not going to get a repeat of what Jess is doing, and I think that's great. She's got what she approaches, and I've got what I approach. My stuff is more concerned about getting out of indoctrinating religions, escaping escaping indoctrination, escaping religion, escaping government, and thinking as you've been told, being obedient. These are things that I talk about. It's concerned with heresy. I deal a lot with heresy, being disobedient, being non-conforming. These are the kind of things that I focus on, and I've got a lot of videos that talk about that kind of stuff.
Great. Well, I'm sure there's plenty of people in my audience that'll be interested in rebellion.
Probably so. Probably
Yeah.
so. I'm at Chuck Swindoll. That's my YouTube site. I'm hard to find. I'll put a link, or Jess will put a link
Yep.
on the bottom of the video, and that way you can go right to my site, because I'm kind of hard to find because I have a popular dad. So it's sometimes hard to find me, but we'll put a link and you'll be able to find it fine.
Yes, you can find all those links in the description below. Thank you, Dad, for joining me in this video today. And I love you so
Jess.
much. Yeah.
I
Happy
love you,
Father's
Jess.
Day. I love you too.
Thank you so much. I love
Yeah,
you.
I love you. Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.